Hello and welcome to the Global Business of Data Festival. My name is Catherine King and I'm the Head of Digital Content and Community here at Crinium. We do hope you've enjoyed the morning of global content, which saw us take a trip around the world, chatting to a diverse set of leaders. Now we're excited to kick off our regional content. Up first is a brilliant presentation session all about what you need to consider during a company acquisition. Now, remember, because we are live, that means you get the chance to ask your amazing questions. You can do so in the Q&A feature on your screen on the right-hand side. We've already had some really great observations and questions in there, so please do carry those on. And of course, I will put these to our guests and speakers towards the end of their session, so make sure you get them in nice and early. Now, without further ado, please welcome to the virtual stage the wonderful Neil Taylor, who's the VP of Data Strategy for MasterCard. Neil, take it away.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you. That's great. As Catherine says, Vice President of Data Strategy, and I look after the Europe and EMEA regions for MasterCard. As part of that role, my responsibility includes working with our mergers and acquisitions teams, undertaking due diligence around the data functions, and then leading the integration work streams. This presentation is really about what that involves and why the data function forms such an important aspect of an acquisition. My first role when I left university was working for a technology holding company, and data due diligence back then meant ensuring that all the patents were properly lodged and that we understood the filing cabinet system. That was about it. And as you can imagine, due diligence in today's world has moved on quite substantially. We are operating in an extremely connected ecosystem. We have a whole range of external influences and factors that impact upon us, including all the various regulatory and vendor side of it, all the way through to cloud providers and customers, partners, and everyone that we work with. This applies equally to the acquisitions that we are targeting or looking at, and they have their own set of connections and interactions that we need to understand from a data perspective. So again, just to I'm going to put a little bit of context around the environment in which we operate before I go into a little bit more detail about how we go about undertaking, or what the data function's role actually is in the process. But again, it's important to recognize the environment in which we operate, and that is based around some foundational data regulations, which, as this audience, I'm sure you're all very familiar with. So I'm not going to go into detail as to what the regulations actually mean. But if you think about, we have GDPR. MasterCard operates in the payments environment, so there are a number of industry-specific regulations that we are very aware of and take account of, particularly around Payment Services Directorate, secure data, secure customer authentication, all sorts of activities like that. And then we have peripheral regulations such as open data, which again, we need to understand, because organizations that we may be targeting may be basing business activities on or around these regulations, so we need to understand and make sure that they're there. And of course, it's kind of a constantly evolving space, that regulatory piece. And if we look back over time and think about where we're heading, Europe in particular is awash with regulation and directives and activity around data. And all of these impact us in some form or another, be that artificial intelligence, if we're looking at some innovative fintechs, or digital identity, or data acts, data spaces, databases, database directives. All of this impact, all of this we need to understand so that we can assess an organization against not just our own internal needs and activities, but how they sit within this environment that we operate within. Now, the best way to try and remember that is that we're in a fully connected and a fully global world as well. So it's not just Europe where we have this. We consider, obviously, I personally look after the MEA region as well. So there is activity and regulatory change happening all over the world. And this is just taking one snapshot of one area, which is around privacy and data protection. Something that impacts us fairly substantially is data localization. Some refer to it data sovereignty. And again, we need to understand where in the world this is all happening, where in the world acquisition targets are operating. Now, if we then bring that down to our, how do we sort of baseline that internally? We start from a perspective of a set of data principles and our responsibility towards data owners. So as an organization, we believe that we must be guided by the rights of individuals. And we apply this thinking and theory as much to those that we're looking at as we do to ourselves. So we believe that an individual owns their data. They should have control over it. They should benefit from the use of it. And it's our responsibility to protect it. And that leads us into 6 principles which underlie all of the work that we do from a data function perspective. And that includes the M&A activity. So security and privacy. We operate best-in-class security, and we ensure that we follow our internal privacy principles on a global basis. We need to be accountable. We need to be accountable not just to the individuals whose data it is, but to the stakeholders and customers and others that are going to rely on that on that data and on that information. We must be transparent. So when we think about how we use data, particularly artificial intelligence, or if we are looking at personal information and other data, we must be able to put the individuals in control of that data. And that plays through again to aspects which I'll come on to shortly on the acquisition side. We must perform with integrity. We must follow our governance processes. We must be personally responsible as individuals and as a corporate collective around how we deploy and use our data. But again, data is not there to be necessarily locked away and hidden. Individuals and customers expect us to innovate with the data. They expect us to deliver more and better services, better protection, better control, for example, against fraud, money laundering, and to develop innovative services that are going to benefit them in the long run. And we must, through all of this, consider our social impact. So how does the data function and how does the data that we use in the organization impact society, and how do we ensure it impacts society for the better? So if we remember all those principles, that takes us into how do we engage as a function in sort of an M&A environment. And so we base our engagement on an initial assessment as to sort of the acquisition complexity. So we're looking at sort of four different levels of potential engagement, and they ramp up, as you would imagine, on the complexity scale. So first off, in the bottom left, we look at those sort of acquisitions where there's very minimal data assets available. There's no third-party data suppliers. There's no data collection actively ongoing. You're probably looking simply at internal data around employees or customers, things like that. We then sort of move up a scale into organizations where the data assets they have might be useful or interesting to a single line of business within MasterCard. So maybe they're important to our cyber and intelligence teams. Maybe they're important to our loyalty and services teams. We then move up one more step again to organizations where they will be the potential data assets in the target acquisition have value across the enterprise. So this is where we get a little bit more complex, but the opportunity from a data perspective is more substantial. And then the final element there is where it's a data-led acquisition, i.e. the value we expect to gain is generated predominantly from the data assets that an organization might hold. At that very lowest level, what we're doing is we have some basic tools. I'll show you some examples in a minute. But a simple merger and acquisition scorecard, we complete that, look for any risks, but generally don't get too heavily involved in the actual acquisition. Where there's single line of business assets, then the governance function within data or the data strategy function might get engaged and will generally work alongside others in the M&A team and you act as subject matter experts around the data due diligence. Third level up, we're generally pulling in all the data functions within the organization to engage. So we're looking at strategy, we're looking at data sourcing, we're looking at data governance, MDM. All of those functions become engaged in not just the due diligence, but the later integration, which is much more critical when we get up to this level. And then as a data-led acquisition, then the data function in effect sponsors the overall process. So we're in effect leading the activity across the board. So then once we've sort of understood what level of engagement we're actually undertaking, the key next kind of area is, okay, what do we actually want to know and understand? So we built ourselves in effect a sort of a hierarchy of questions, or category set of questions really. So we start off with some fundamental core questions around who they are and what they do, who is this acquisition, just so that everybody on the team can understand. But then we go into more depth and sort of funnel through the questions and have a whole series of in effect prepackaged information that we wish to understand from a data perspective. So we want to understand about data quality. What systems are in place, what processes are there, how does the acquisition target currently understand its own data quality? What is their opinion on it? Things like that. What geographic coverage are we talking about? Are we talking very localized? Are we talking single country? Are we talking regional, or are we talking global? What sort of volumes are involved? Again, is this going to be a fairly lightweight integration, or actually are we going to have to consider some sort of some substantial infrastructure or other aspects? What platforms are there in operation? What type of sort of sensitive data might be around? And equally important to us, what's the potential for reputational risk? MasterCard is a very ethical and responsible organization, so we don't want to be taking on acquisitions or targets where there's a substantial element of risk from the data that the target potentially has. And then I sort of mentioned some tools to help us through that, to help us through those sort of question sets. We do very simple things. We have lists of sort of standard questions about, who are they? What sort of data have they got? Will it improve the quality of our own data? How is it currently being used? What's the market sector and coverage? Things like that. And we have some sort of tools within which we start to score and understand the organization. So we're simple scorecards, just helping us to keep track and understand where there might be value, risk, opportunity, things like that. So some very basic tools, but they're very useful when you're sort of moving from one to the other. We then go into a little bit further deep. So if you're imagining that that curve I showed, or that chart I showed you earlier on of the levels of acquisitions, where there is an acquisition that is likely to have interest across more than one line of business, we start to look at the data aspect with a little bit more of a magnifying glass, and we start to understand sort of risks and opportunities associated with the target company. So we're looking at data utility and the data rights that might be coming with them. Is there potential mitigation that we can understand, or we can see, or we can that we think might help us in the future? So if we look at data management, what systems, processes, and technologies already in use? What resources might MasterCard have that are already available to be deployed if the data management is not up to the same standards that we would typically expect? And it's not unusual. We're often looking at small startups all the way through to sort of medium and large organizations. No one organization has the same tool sets and capabilities as each other. Data loss, for example. What detection systems and processes are in place to understand data loss? If those aren't there, how straightforward is it going to be to apply the MasterCard technology to those tools and systems? Is data retention still a manual process? Can we automate it? Does the organization have a substantial amount of personally identifiable information? That includes information related to employees and customers. Do we need to undertake any training or introduce any processes to support the understanding and the development of knowledge around PII that we would expect as MasterCard? So again, as part of the integration, which you'll see in a bit, we have a lot of training activities. And again, data quality, what's in place? How effective is it? Do we need to undertake any remediation work? Are there potential areas where, for example, geolocation data, to take one example, might be below quality? What sort of remediation is going to be needed to improve that? And then if it's a particular thing, we go even one step down. So if we take, for example, that very top line of data utility and rights, we come down and we dive slightly deeper into it. So what we're trying to do is understand our findings, what are the potential impacts, and what are the potential mitigations. So we look at all this in a great deal of detail to understand, how are we going to, what are the findings, what are these potential impacts? Let's socialize those, let's understand them. Okay, what are the potential mitigations? What are those mitigations going to cost? And that's a key part of it, because as you'll see in a moment, cost forms part of the investment business case as to whether or not this is going to be an acquisition that we pursue. So at this stage, as you can imagine, we're still at the due diligence process. We're still looking and understanding, is this an organization that is going to fit well within MasterCard? And so at the end of that, we're delivering an assessment and a summary of what we found in our due diligence. So what risks have we identified? What are the findings? And what are the potential mitigations? Equally, and I haven't gone into the same level of detail on this, but what are the opportunities? Where has the target acquisition got potential for either complementary data to MasterCard, or that the company has, or the acquisition has distribution networks or connections in that connected environment that we saw earlier on, where it might be appropriate to make available additional MasterCard services. So can we use their data supply networks and things like that. And then finally, what is the investment needed in order to realize, to either reduce risks, undertake the integration, or realize the opportunities? And all of that contributes to the overall business case for MasterCard. But as you can see, the data function forms quite a substantial piece of risk and opportunity activity, along with the what you'd call the sort of standard work around looking at the systems and the technology in place and the databases and the supporting infrastructure. So once we've undertaken all of that, clearly the finance and other teams will have built all this into their models. Yeah, we have a successful acquisition, and so we begin, with day one, and we start to look at the integration. And so, from our from a data function perspective, we're looking across 3 areas, which we break down into 4 different silos underneath. So we're planning, we're executing, and then finally we're transitioning to business as usual. On the planning side, depending on their scale, again, referencing back to that original chart on how involved the data function is. But if we assume we're in the upper 2 levels where there's some enterprise capabilities, or it's a data-led acquisition, then we're defining at the integration kickoff, we're defining where all the dependencies exist. We often have cross dependencies with our legal colleagues, with our infrastructure and technology colleagues, and everything else. What are the key decisions that need to be taken? What resources are required to make the integration successful? How are we going to align cross-functionally? How are we going to align with our colleagues in privacy or in technology, and what support do we need, either internal or external? That's all kind of a key piece. We then have to kind of kick off the onboarding function internally as well, because and this becomes incredibly important, because the majority of my data colleagues that are going to be involved in the integration activity, this is not their primary day job. So their primary day job is looking after master data management, or looking after third-party data sourcing, or they're looking after tagging and lineage and all sorts of other important activities that we need to tap into in order to make an integration successful. It's, in some respects, it's very similar to development of a new product, albeit it all happens in one big bang. So it's all happening concurrently rather than sequentially, as you would imagine with a new product development. So we're looking at, okay, can we brief our internal teams? Can we onboard all our necessary colleagues, get them up to speed, get them to buy into the desire to bring this new organization into MasterCard? Let's set up the workshops, and as is necessary, recruit either temporary or permanent team members that are going to carry out that are going to help us on the journey. And then we start to deliver those activities. So again, we're looking at all the activity around master data management, understanding the data flows. This is incredibly important. Again, going back to that, whose regulatory slides popped up earlier in the presentation. We need to understand where data is flowing. Where is it stored? What does it contain? Where is it flowing to? And we need to document and capture all that so that we can undertake all the proper assessments there. We're looking at inventory, so inventorying and cataloging the data and the databases that exist. Where is it all? It's incredibly important that we understand what we have, where we have it, and also make that information available to our colleagues across the business, so that, again, we can get full value out of whatever acquisition it happens to be. We're looking at process development and change. And then finally, we come to reviewing and understanding the outcomes. So at some point in the future, every acquisition generally will transition to a business as usual environment. What that basically means is they are MasterCard, and the products and technologies and data and services that everything is there are all now being operated and managed as if they were part of an internal offering from the beginning. So we're documenting any outstanding tasks, anything that is left from the integration, but we're also in effect releasing people back to their day jobs and helping them understand. And well, I was about to say letting them back to their day jobs. That probably just means, the next one has now come along. But that's part of working for a global organization. We're never stopping. We're looking at lessons learned, and very importantly, as I said, closing down that work stream. And then that's pretty much how the function operates. So once that is all done and undertaken, that is success. That is what we consider to be a successful due diligence and integration process. And if the data function has performed its role well and effectively, then the transition and the outcomes will be recognized across the business. So we'll see that as a win. So that was it. I think I have a minute or two left if there are any immediate questions, but you're welcome to sort of ping me on LinkedIn or anything else.
And I'm on mute. Well, Neil, thank you so much. I've got pages of notes here, and we do have a minute. So if you do have questions, just pop them in the chat really quickly. But I think what was really interesting to me was actually the core skills required for this to be a success, right? Getting everyone on the same page with the language you're using and having that true understanding of, say, data quality. What does that mean to your organization versus what it means to my organization, and getting everyone on the same page. We do have 1 minute to ask a question, so I'm going to be cheeky and ask my one. You've spoken about the entire process here. For you, what would you say is the most challenging kind of pinpoint on that process for it to either be a success or for it to be quite a challenging process? What would you say is the biggest barrier?
I would say that the most important thing to get right is the communication, because as data people, we understand our part of the world and we understand data, but we need to communicate what that means in a language that the wider business understands, be that risks, opportunities, or how we potentially intend to mitigate things. Because that can help determine the initial success or failure of an acquisition. And if we communicate effectively, and if we use language that the wider worlds understand rather than our usual sort of geekiness, that I would suggest is probably the most important aspect of it.
Yeah, amazing. Well, Neil, thank you so much. That session absolutely flew by. So just a reminder to our audience, if you're still digesting and you have future questions, then please, you can connect with Neil on the platform, but I would also encourage, as always, connect with our speakers and guests via LinkedIn as well. But up next, we will be heading to a session that was previously recorded earlier this year at the wonderful Chief Data and Analytics Officer UK event. We'll see you over there.